Okay, so we're going to fly through with a quick review of what we talked about yesterday, and then we'll pick up where we left off, and we don't have a whole lot more to go, and we'll take the quiz after we're done with this. So this is the Last Supper in John. It is the last evening that Jesus has with his disciples, and we're in chapter 13. Chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 will all be this last night. Or 18. 19 is the crucifixion. So we've got a lot that's happening on this last night. So what we talked about was the occasion. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And this is talking about not just this particular event of the Last Supper, but this whole evening he is going to show how much he loves and cares for the disciples. So we talked a little bit about Passover, that it was a Passover in Egypt originally, but it was to be a permanent Passover. It was to be something that the Jews celebrated forever, and they have for thousands of years celebrated this Passover. And we talked about the afternoon of Nisan 14. They would take a lamb to the altar. It would be sacrificed there. The insides of the lamb would be sacrificed on the altar, and the lamb would go home to be, the lamb's body would go home to be cooked and used as part of the supper. And then the lamb was roasted, and the ceremony begins. And we talked about that very meaningful ceremony, that every aspect of it had some sort of connection to the Passover in Egypt. And then we talked about how this entire passage lets us know of Christ's knowledge, that he knew what was happening. He knew his hour had come. He knew that who his betrayer was and what he was about to do. And he knows his own identity. He knows he's Messiah. He knows he's going to the cross. He's not trying to escape that in any way. He's very resolute about it. And then we see Christ's humility as he wraps a towel around himself and takes a basin of water and goes around and washes the feet of each of his disciples. Something that the lowest slave would do. It was shocking to them, obviously, that Jesus would do this. It showed tremendous humility. And then we talked about Christ's heart, his heart for his disciples, and particularly his heart for Judas. He had compassion toward Judas. He was broken and compassionate toward Judas. The curriculum said that Jesus looked past the deed to his need. Any sort of brokenness in any of our lives comes out of some hurt or some need or some sin in our lives. And this was true of Judas as well. And he even honors Judas by offering him the sop, offering him the bread to eat. And then we talked about Peter's rash statements. That when Jesus came to wash his feet, he said, "You will never wash my feet." And then he says, after he realizes that what Jesus says is that if you don't let me do this, you have no part of me. Then he says, okay, then don't just wash my feet, wash all of me. Give me a whole bath. And Jesus says, you don't need that. If you've had a bath, you just need to clean your feet. And then later, when Jesus, says he's leaving, and Peter doesn't understand that, and he says, I want to go with you. I'll lay my life down for you. And eventually he will, but he will also deny Jesus 3 times that night. And then we see the disciples' insecurity. When Jesus says, one of you will betray me, they say, is it I? Is it I? They didn't know. They weren't confident in their own relationship with Jesus. You'd think that they would know that they wouldn't do that, but they weren't. Maybe it's me. They didn't know for sure. And so they were insecure in their own strength to stand for Christ. Now, this last one says, and this is where we pick up, this last one talks about the disciples' ignorance. That's a pretty strong word. And I am going to, as I have before, kind of tone down what the curriculum says to say, because I think that they had no way of understanding what was going on here. And so I'm not going to be too hard on them. So Jesus talked about the fact that he would be glorified soon, that the time of his glorification, the hour of his glorification had come. And when we talk about the glorification of Jesus, we're talking about his death. That was an awful thing, but it was also part of his glorification also was a wonderful thing. We call Good Friday because it is good and awful at the same time. So it includes his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. All of those are part of Christ's glorification. And then he goes and he talks to the disciples about their need to live in love. That he talks about loving one another. He gives this commandment of love, this rule of love, that we should be characterized most by love. The Bible says that Jesus said they'll know you're Christian, they'll know you're mine, or they know you believe in me by your love. Is that what the world sees of us? Is our love? And so he tells them this. Now, he starts out though saying, I'm going away and you can't come with me. And then he says, but a new commandment I give you. A commandment I give you, a new commandment I give you, that you should love one another as I have loved you. And this is how everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. And then Peter, who I think never even heard that, blurts out, why can't I go with you? I'm going with you. Wherever you're going, I'm going. Jesus says, you can't go with me now. You will later. So the curriculum says that Peter in particular and the disciples in general ignored his statements about loving one another. I don't think Peter ignored it. I think Peter just couldn't get past the I'm going away and you can't go with me. I'm sure you understand this. I'm sure there are times when you know you're supposed to be listening to your teacher. This would be one of them, by the way. But your head is elsewhere. Not that you're trying to ignore what I'm saying. Your head is elsewhere. And once Jesus said, I'm leaving and you're not coming, Peter had been with him, all of them had been with him day and night for 3 years. He couldn't imagine that. So I don't think he ignored it. I think he couldn't focus on it. And so he was, and then it says that Peter asked a foolish question. I don't know if it's a foolish question. Why can't I go with you? I don't think it's foolish. I think that he just didn't get it yet. He would eventually. It says here he's totally ignorant about of what was about to happen. Of course he was. He had no way to understand it. So I'm not going to be too tough on Peter. That we're not there yet, actually. I'm not going to be too hard on Peter or any of the other disciples because they had no framework from which to understand a dying Messiah. Messiah wasn't supposed to die. Messiah was supposed to conquer. They thought that Jesus was going to restore the kingdom of Israel right away. Now, the hour has come. Great, let's go get Rome. Let's overthrow Rome. Why would he leave them at this point? And why could they not go with him when he restored Israel? It was very troubling to them. And it isn't just that they didn't understand, they couldn't understand what Jesus was saying. So finally, we have the disciples' failure, their complete failure. All of the disciples, at some point in their time with Jesus, proclaimed their love for him, their commitment to him. We will go wherever you go. We will do whatever you tell us to do. But before the night was over, all but one would desert him in some way or another. One would betray him. One would deny him 3 times. And 9 would run away in fear. Only one disciple stayed with him. Only John was at the foot of the cross. The rest were too afraid to be there. Which we can look at and judge, but really, would I have behaved any differently? And do I in some way deny Christ in far less dire situations? And it causes me to ask this question of myself. Am I willing to follow Christ no matter the cost? I think that's a question that would be good for each of us to ponder. Okay, that's the end of the lecture. And you have the quiz here. You can work together. I don't think there are any questions that you can't answer on this one. And when you're done, if you would please leave them up here, and I will be taking a grade on them.